Hello, everybody. Fraud everywhere. Trying to spot the red flags of fraud. I'm going to take you through this program. We're going to start talking about fake emails. That's business email compromise. Then I'm going to take you through malicious programs called malware. And we'll start with some of the basics. We're going to talk about keylogger and ransomware and spyware. And then I'm going to take you through the fake ID and fake notaries, real life examples of fake sellers, and how do we confirm sellers' identities. I'm going to talk to you about our wonderful U.S. Embassy and identity verification. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the lexicon, the vocabulary of fraudsters. And I'll show you real life examples of how First American was able to detect fraud in various emails. I'll talk for a minute or two on a cashier's check scam that is currently going around. We'll talk about authority issues, red flags of fraud and forgery, and tips to be aware of. If you have a pen handy, write this down. I, as in igloo, C as in Charlie, the number 3.gov, IC3.gov. If you come across fraud, that's one of the places to file a fraud report, federal government. You can also file with your local and state law enforcement. And if you are aware of any notary violations by New York notaries, you can contact the New York Secretary of State. So we're going to dive in. There we go. Okay. So as everyone is very much aware, there are daily attempts by fraudsters to trick innocent parties that are involved in real estate transactions and banking transactions into doing something that will allow that fraudster to perpetrate a fraud, resulting in the loss of, in some cases, hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars. So there's been a focus and an increase in the title industry's attempts, as well as the banking industry's attempts to battle fraud. Fraud, which is a result of BEC, business email compromise, RPS, which is related real property scams, and REWF, which is real estate wire fraud. In both up and down markets, fraudsters are everywhere. The general consensus being now that in a down market, we're seeing more and more attempts at fraud. The long-standing perception that a fraudster is some individual working in a dimly lit basement by himself or herself in an attempt to land a nice score by tricking someone into sending money to them or fraudulently signing real estate transfer documents or mortgages is no longer a valid perception. These fraudsters are well-financed, intelligent, highly educated, and very capable of engaging in real estate wire fraud, business email compromise, and real estate scams. So it's really important that we in the industry, as well as real estate agents, lenders, sellers, lawyers, we understand some of the means and methods that fraudsters use to outwit and dupe people. So there are numerous ways in which scammers can dupe people into helping them commit fraud. And today's presentation is going to focus on the ways that you and I can spot those red flags in an attempt to help to try and prevent that fraud. The focus is not going to be on wire fraud. That's a topic that deserves and gets its own presentation, but I will touch briefly on that as well. And so combating fraud is a major priority for our industry, and it affects our whole industry, from title underwriters and agents to real estate brokers and attorneys to the buyers, the sellers, lenders, and even notaries who are being victimized. It has an effect, obviously, on our state and federal governments as well, because the FBI, the Department of Justice, all of our state attorney generals are now expending large sums of money and other resources to combat fraud. Ultimately, that cost gets passed on to the taxpayers. So we're going to talk first about BEC, business email compromise, the fake emails. In our technology-heavy environment, it's easy for fraudsters and scammers to infiltrate our companies. One of the easiest ways they can successfully infiltrate our companies and make it easier to commit fraud is by attacking emails, commonly known as cyber attacks. It's no secret that cyber attacks are continuing to increase, and so the need to raise awareness about these attacks and educate ourselves as to some do's and don'ts becomes essential. So, according to SANS Security Awareness, cyber attackers send out millions of emails in the hope that someone, somewhere, is going to take the bait. This is known as phishing. I know you've all heard of this phrase. And the emails from these attackers attempt to fool us into taking an action, such as clicking on a link, opening an attachment, or completing a form. With phishing, our cyber attackers are not sure exactly who gets these emails, but taking any one of the following seemingly harmless actions can get you hooked, like a fish, so to speak. Phishing is also one of the major causes of ransomware infections, and we'll get to that in a bit. So what are the red flags that we can be on the lookout for to determine if an email or a message is a phishing attack? Well, SANS Security lists the following red flags to look for in phishing attacks. Number one, messages that are addressed or directed to dear friend or dear customer or some other generic greeting. The scammers who are phishing don't know who the recipients of the email are. They're just trying to fish/catch as many people as possible. Number two, messages creating a strong sense of urgency or curiosity. This is a very popular theme that are used by fraudsters. Number three, messages or emails claiming to be from an official organization such as your bank, but which contain grammar, punctuation, or spelling mistakes, or an email claiming to be from an official organization which actually comes from a different account. Number four, receipt by you of an email in which the from address is an official organizational email account, but the reply to address is someone's personal email account. For example, johndoe@gmail.com. It's always a good idea, especially if you're not expecting an email, to hover your mouse over the from and the reply to addresses. If they don't jive, this is a red flag, and you should not click on any link or open any attachment in this type of email. Number five, messages requesting highly sensitive information, such as a credit card number, a bank account number, or a password. That's a red flag. Another red flag is when you receive a message from someone you don't know, but the tone of the message just doesn't sound like him or her. For example, an email from a coworker urgently asking you for some sensitive or private information about one of your employees or other coworkers or a file you're working on. Cyber attackers can create an email that does appear to be from a friend or a coworker, but in fact is actually a phishing attempt. And I know you've heard of stories of people whose email signature and contact information has been spoofed. So here's some sound advice. If you receive any of these types of emails, report it to your IT security team, and whenever messages have attachment, only open those you were expecting. Look, let's face it, you're probably not getting into trouble if you delete an email that you think is suspicious. If it's a real email, it's likely the sender of that email will try to call you to discuss it. And hey, don't forget about using the phone. It's what we used to do all the time before the internet. Now we've just gotten so used to using the internet and we kind of ignore the phone now. It's still okay to still use the phone to communicate with people. So now we have these malicious programs known as malware. Since one of the easiest ways that scammers can infiltrate your company is via an email which you've opened, fraudsters and scammers can easily infect your computer with malicious programs, and those are known as malware. Again, I'm sure you've all heard of it. Malicious programs such as a virus, spyware, or ransomware are used by cyber attackers to infect your computers, your cell phones, and your tablets. And once they are installed, the scammers can encrypt or delete your files, spy on your online activities, or steal your passwords. Look, it's up to each one of us to be on our guard to prevent malware from infecting our devices. According to SANS Security Awareness, the most common way cyber attackers infect systems with malware is by tricking us into taking an action, such as opening an infected email with an attachment, clicking on a bad link, or even plugging in an infected USB device. And 3 common examples of what can happen if your devices become infected are keylogger, ransomware, and spyware. Once your system is infected, scammers and attackers can use it to capture your every keystroke, including your login and passwords. That's keylogger. The attackers then log into your accounts. They pretend to be you, actively following your deals and waiting for the right moment to strike, such as when wires or documents are ready to be sent. Fraudsters, posing as you, can then easily manipulate a transaction as a result of this business email compromise. Look, we could probably spend a whole lot of time formulating in our minds the many types of scenarios that a fraudster could create if this were to happen. Not a good idea, right? Think about all the times you use your computers or your phones to do your banking. Not too cool if somebody's got your login and password. Now, keep in mind that just because your system may have been infected, it does not mean an active strike is imminent. Fraudsters are sometimes in no hurry, and they can bide their time and wait weeks or even months before they attack. They embed themselves into your system, and they wait until the time is right for them to act. Now, ransomware, I'm sure you've all heard of this. Another type of malware, which after your computer is infected, encrypts and locks you out of your own files, locks you out of your documents and spreadsheets. The cyber attacker then demands that your company pay a ransom to decrypt your files to regain access to them. And as you can see in red on the screen, if you suspect that your device has been infected, report it immediately to your IT security team. Don't try and fix it yourself. Even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee you'll recover your files. And in addition, your computer could still remain infected with other types of malware. I know recently the Dole company, actually it was more about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, the Dole company was hit with ransomware. I don't know how much they paid. MGM Resorts was hit, and they paid $100 million to get their computers back. By some accounts, 90% of ransomware attacks begin with a phishing email to an unsuspecting victim. U.S. banks and financial institutions processed roughly 1.2 billion with a B in likely ransomware payments in 2021, which at that time was a new record and was almost triple the amount of the previous year. Make no mistake, cyber criminals are making it very lucrative for them to engage in this type of behavior. So we all really have to be on our guard. You don't want your firm or company brought to its knees. This week, we just found out that the city of West Haven, Connecticut's IT department was alerted to a security incident, and they shut all their systems down out of an abundance of caution. For the last 2 months, Wexford County in Michigan has been under a cyber attack. And again, one of the issues when that happens is they can't record deeds. So if you can't get an update on title searches, it's going to make it harder to sell a piece of land. People trying to get a loan to build a house on land they already own can't prove to the bank they own the land. They can't get title insurance. Okay, spyware. Just as the name sounds, this type of malware can take control of your microphone or camera and spy on your every move. SANS Security Awareness is one company that advises that there are many types of malware. It's a problem for all computers, not just those running Windows, because malware can infect any device, including Mac computers, smartphones, and tablets. One way to stop malware attacks is to keep your computer or the device you're using updated with the latest operating system and patches. And please ensure that you have antivirus installed and that it's also current. And only install well-known mobile apps from trusted sites. Yes, your cell phone is also very susceptible to attack. And for those lawyers on this call, I believe it's now becoming an ethical problem, and you could be subject to discipline if you are not keeping your devices up to date. In addition, if you are conducting business and you're using websites like AOL or Yahoo, those are known to not have proper protection against these types of malware attacks. So please be careful. Now, again, only open those email attachments you're expecting. Don't click on suspicious links. Common sense dictates that if an email or a text message seems odd or suspicious or too good to be true, it's probably an attack, and you are better off not clicking on any links contained in it or opening any attachments. Forward it to your IT people for a further examination. All right. This is particularly embarrassing for me. I'm on the fraud prevention practice group at First American, along with about 80 or 90 other underwriters nationwide. And yours truly got nailed on a malicious website. We like Google. We use it all the time. But I learned the hard way just recently that you have to be careful when using Google. Malicious actors make it their business to know what types of forms and documents that financial and title companies like First American and law firms search for in the web. So you ask, how did this happen, Vince? Well, I got a phone call from an agent who said one of the clerks, I don't know if it was Suffolk or Nassau, told them that to file a termination of a building loan agreement in New York, you needed a Section 22 affidavit. I knew it wasn't true. It can't be. And my agent just hounded me, and I said, all right, I'll do some research for you. So look at the screen. I typed in termination of building loan agreement in New York, and the very first site that popped up was this. I thought I was safe because it says HTTPS, right? Usually you think it's safe when you do that. These fraudsters make sure that their malicious sites are one of the top results when you complete a search for a particular form or document on the web, as seen as in this slide. So be careful. As you can see in this slide, the top result for an official document from New York comes up as a blog site from Chile. That's the .cl, right? A blog site should never be valued as a resource since it's one of the most common types of sites used by malicious actors, since content uploaded is usually not monitored. Here's the advice. If a site doesn't have .com, .org, or .gov at the end, don't click on it. And be careful with zip files and files with .mov. Look, this was embarrassing for me, right? For a guy on the Fraud Prevention Practice Committee. But I shared it with people in First American, and they continued to share it. And now you know, just because the site underneath it says HTTPS, it does not mean it's safe. So as much as we like Google and we use it all the time, I know I must use it 4 or 5 times a day. Be careful. Be very careful. Yes, they took my computer away. They shut me down, and I had to wait like 2 days for another laptop, much to the consternation of my coworkers and our clients because I was unable to work. Okay. Dan, this one's not advancing. Ah, no, gotta go back. Oh, no, we don't. Here we go. The fake ID and the fake notary. I'm not going to admit to anything here, but I know some of you in your misspent youth tried to get fake IDs so you could skirt the alcohol restrictions in the locales where you grew up. Now, you might look back on that today and chuckle, but that's child's play compared to what's happening now. Fraudsters have gotten very good at creating false IDs as part of their arsenal in their real estate scams, whether they be in the form of passports, driver licenses, social security cards, and the like. One way to combat fraud is to ask for and carefully analyze any form of ID that a person is presenting as a means of identification. One example of a fraud that was attempted but failed had to do with the IDs you see in front of you now, which were presented to one of our title agents. Here, our fraudster was posing as the seller of real estate. The reason the title agent knew these IDs were forged was because the title agent actually knew the seller. The title agent had actually closed the transaction for the seller when the seller bought the property. The actual owner of the property was an Asian woman, and now this fraudster was trying to sell the property. And these forms of ID are clearly not of an Asian woman. Well, what if the title agent didn't know the seller? Is there anything else you see in examining these IDs which could alert you to the fact that they're fraudulent? Well, for one thing, the pictures in these IDs which were presented are exactly the same. It's pretty unlikely that someone would happen to wear the same exact shirt for two different ID photos. Secondly, if you look carefully at them, you'll see that there are two different birth dates, March 9th, 1958, and September 5th, 1966. It's likely that the fraudster figured that a person, in this case a title agent, wouldn't look carefully enough at the IDs to notice two birthdays. Finally, if you look at the address on the right, you'll see it reads 123 Any Street. Do you know anyone that actually lives at an address like that? Someone should always be able to provide proper identification when asked, whether they're attempting to sell property, take out a loan, etc. Excuses for not providing acceptable forms of IDs are numerous, and they are red flags. On one occasion, an excuse that was given for not being able to produce an authentic ID was, "Oh, I'm renewing my visa and the embassy has my passport." Folks, that's a red flag. And as one of my colleagues pointed out, that's like a child saying to the teacher, "Oh, the dog ate my homework." Stay alert and examine any proffered forms of identification very carefully. Now, believe it or not, this is another passport that was sent to First American as a form of identification. Does this person look familiar? Of course, it's John Travolta. Someone overseas actually forged a passport, used a picture of John Travolta from the Pulp Fiction movie. How about the name of the town, Fern Tree Gully? How about the V in his middle name, Vincent, not being capitalized? Look, I did say some of these fraudsters were highly educated, but those fraudsters that come from different parts of the world, they might not have an idea that this is one of the more popular movies and popular actors in American culture. One way to combat fraud, feel free to avail yourself of the Google reverse image search, which is a program that allows you to download a picture of someone. And then by using the app, you'll be able to see if that particular picture appears in Google. Okay? So if fraudsters are using the same picture of a person on various forms of ID, Google's reverse image search is going to allow you to find those pictures. We have seen, for example, pictures of the same people used on different forms of ID from different countries. How do you find it? Simple. Google it, but don't do what Vince Plaia did. Make sure you're Googling it and you're clicking on a viable network. Okay. Do pictures look superimposed? Scrutinize any ID provided to you, especially those IDs provided by email. If they're fake, chances are you're going to spot something that looks a bit off. Suspect every transaction where people do not appear in your office or they don't appear at a closing and they want to provide IDs by email. Know and control your deal, embed yourself into the transaction. Reach out, connect with parties to the transaction. That's a very valuable lesson. Takes more time and it could be a little bit more agonizing, but it could help you spot a fraud. Fake notaries. So we have one particular scenario that happened where an agent closed on the sale of $1 million vacant lot. Shortly after the closing, the title agent was contacted by the rightful owners, who said they never listed the property for sale. The details began to unravel, and the real estate agents and brokers and title agent discovered that someone who posed as the seller fabricated the sale. The fraudulent seller claimed to live in Canada, was on holiday in London, and had arranged to have the deed acknowledged before a notary at the U.S. Embassy in London. The notary was Ellen Wong. The quote-unquote seller requested that the funds be wired to a New York account. Now, Ellen Wong was actually a notary, but she was never a notary at the U.S. Embassy in London. She had actually been a notary at the U.S. Embassy in Edinburgh, Scotland, but she retired 6 months earlier and wasn't in London. Now take a look at the notary here. Although the stamp may make this look official, it's fake. The word notarial, should be notarial, is spelled incorrectly, and that was a tip-off that this might be fraudulent. That was the item that caused the agent post-closing to actually call the embassy, and because of that call, they were able to determine that Ellen Wong was never a notary at the U.S. Embassy in London, hence the document was fake. Fortunately, in this scenario, most of the money was recovered, but the lesson is real to be on the lookout. Even if a stamp looks real, there's a chance that the perpetrator has actually created or had a false notary stamp created. What you can do if you see a notary from a supposed embassy is check the address of the embassy that appears on a proffered notary stamp against the actual embassy address. In addition, you should know that State Department employee names are public information, so you can look that up as well. Here's the real Ellen Notary certification. You can see, and I'm going to show you in the next slide, how they differ from each other. But one point is that the commission for embassy personnel is indefinite. You see it says commission indefinite. The fake notary has an expiration date for a notary, and these are the two side by side. This is the real notary on the right, fake one on the left. Again, we have seen similar fake notaries, but with different names. Be mindful about what you're looking at. You know, one of my favorite TV shows, even to this day, is Columbo with Peter Falk. You may just have to put on your Columbo detective coat to sniff out the forgery, because some of these fraudulent notaries and notarial certificates are not terribly creative, but they keep using them in the hopes that they will be successful. They keep using them, the same ones, over and over. Well, they'll change a name, but they don't change their fake notary stamp. So let's talk about fake sellers. Obviously, as you can see from the screen, I'm stating the obvious when I say there's been a tremendous increase in online fraudulent transactions. Perpetrators are contacting realtors, pretending to be a seller and wanting to list their homes. except they don't own the property. And they are communicating with title agents, brokers, attorneys, and the like only via online. Again, this is a red flag. So we had a recent incident that involved a quote unquote seller and his vacant land in Southeast Florida. By the way, you're going to hear this a few more times today. Unencumbered vacant land is automatically a red flag. So we had a real estate agent in Tampa, which is on the west coast of Florida, was contacted by a proposed seller, quote unquote, in Orlando, which is in Central Florida, who wanted to sell their vacant lot in Cape Coral on the Gulf of Mexico. The fraudulent notary public was from Kissimmee, which is near Orlando, and this fake seller went to Cape Coral on the west coast of Florida to sign documents to send them back to the title company, who recorded the documents without validating the deed. Of course, it was fraudulent. Now, keep in mind that notaries are participants in these fraud schemes as well. Is there anything in this fact pattern that seems unusual to you? I think so. I think you have to ask yourself why a seller in Orlando would contact a real estate agent on the other side of the state in Tampa to list the property in Cape Coral. This type of scam is growing in popularity, especially where property is vacant and unencumbered by mortgages. So what are some things that can be done to prevent this? Well, if there's a sale and a broker or a listing agent is involved in the sale, you might have to ask these questions. Do you personally know the seller? If so, for how long have you known the seller? How did you, as the listing agent, obtain this listing? Did you meet the seller face to face? Did you confirm the seller's ID? What type of ID was presented? Now, some red flags in this type of scenario that we're seeing are the following. There's no visual communication or telephone communication. The quote-unquote seller only communicates via email. They refuse to provide photo ID prior to listing the property with the broker. The seller lives in one place, wants to close in another location, wants the funds wired to a bank or financial institution in a third location. Now, it may be obvious to state, but if you can't visually see someone, this can be a red flag. And keep in mind that there's a growing trend nationwide for this type of scenario where the property is either vacant or is vacant and unencumbered with no mortgages. So in a sale situation, you really do need to verify the identity of the seller before you get to the closing table. And you're in this deal, right? You are well within your rights to request the ID that the real estate agent used to verify the seller before they took the listing. For a fee, there are companies such as Socure, Hit Global, or OCR Labs. They have means to verify, for example, whether a proffered driver's license is a valid form of ID. Don't be afraid to use them. One way to confirm a seller's identity is for you to make direct, in-person, or video conference contact with the seller using independently confirmed contact info. And look, if there are any discrepancies, and I mean any discrepancies, in any documentation provided to you, you need to ask questions about those discrepancies, including but not limited to IDs, entity documents, powers of attorney. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. Does this person live at the property? Can her own lawyer vouch for her? Was there a broker involved? Did the broker actually meet the seller? There could be red flags, such as the property has no mortgage to be paid and the seller is positioned to receive a large cash out. So be aware of that. Another red flag is if you can't speak to or communicate directly with the seller. True story, January 2023, First American flagged a fraudulent transfer because the purported seller just happened to be in the custody of the U.S. government. He was in prison and hence was not actively involved in the transaction. Recently, we had another scenario where the perpetrators claimed they were German citizens that would be in South Africa for signing, but then wanted the title company to wire the proceeds to their bank in Vietnam. Obviously, this is a red flag. And these situations should be big red flags to all of us and shouldn't be ignored. You shouldn't think that these facts and scenarios are just coincidence. Write that down, www.usembassy.gov. I have used this website. We've started to refer people living abroad to go to their respective embassies, right? Why? Various reasons, but the most compelling is that our embassy personnel are very sophisticated and are sophisticated and aware of fraud prevention. They have access to names and watch lists that are generally not available to us in the private sector, not to mention the around-the-clock video surveillance. This website is a fantastic resource that can be used to find every single U.S. embassy or consular office around the world. You can check the address of the embassy that appears on a proffered notary stamp against the actual embassy address. In addition, as I said earlier, State Department employee names are public information, and you can look that up as well on the website. And I did that a few weeks ago and was able to confirm that we had an actual valid notary from a U.S. embassy official. Your customers sometimes object to going to an embassy because it's by appointment only, and often the customer may need a document notarized, but their embassy is hours away and they can't get to the embassy timely. I get that. But invariably, the appointments in embassies are limited to certain days and hours in the week, and appointments may not be available for several weeks. And it's not uncommon that notary services are limited to U.S. citizens only. We also know that because of COVID, embassies are not taking appointments. So you're wondering, well, if this is the case, how do we prevent this previous fiasco? Well, again, like I said, you can actually use the embassy as a tool in preventing what happened in our Ellen Wong example. Once there's a person who's supposed to go to an embassy and they set the date and time for an appointment, you can contact that embassy, confirm the appointment was set or has occurred, and then you can request that once the documents are notarized, that copies of those be transmitted to you via the embassy, together with copies of the forms of ID provided. I'm going to say it again, embed yourself in the transaction. In the event you see a notary from a U.S. embassy or consulate, you can contact via email or phone. You can contact them. They should be able to confirm that that official is in fact an employee and a notary. We've had instances where the embassy or consulate responded within a day with either a confirmation or notification that the person purporting to be a notary was or was not a notary at the embassy. Again, they take this matter very seriously. They can be used by you as a resource to combat fraud. Now we're going to talk about the lexicon, the vocabulary of fraudsters. And did you know that you can detect a fraudster just by the way they write? Every criminal leaves a trace of their crime behind with their language fingerprints. You don't have to be an FBI profiler or a forensic linguist to solve the crime. But if you know what words and grammar fraudsters typically use, that can help you recognize when a fraud is being perpetrated right before your eyes. The first item to examine is their lexicon. There are certain words fraudsters use to manipulate you into doing what they want. And although there are various words that are used, we're going to look at the most common ones. And the number one word used by fraudsters right there is kindly. It's an important red flag. If you see this in email or communication, especially one which contains information about wires, stop and realize there's a good chance you may be dealing with a fraudster. Well, why is the word kindly such a dead giveaway? Because it's not a word we use regularly or frequently in English. We use the word please if we're requesting something politely. We don't say, kindly pass me the salt. We say, please pass me the salt, or pass me the salt, please. But kindly is a word that's prevalent in former British colonies, India, parts of Africa, and they date back from when British colonizers taught in schools. Even today, modern British people don't use this word in their everyday dialect because it's formal and it's antiquated. And since most online fraud originates offshore, often in these former British colonies, they use that word. And if an email contains the word kindly, ask yourself if it makes sense, if the individual you're dealing with would be using this word. Fraudsters will often also use this word multiple times within a single email or communication. The repeated or excessive use of the word in an email is another indication of fraud. It's a major red flag. Words indicating friendship are also red flags. Fraudsters will often draw you in and try and make you feel comfortable by using words of friendship or words that convey familiarity and trust. They'll call you pal or friend or be overly complimentary or thankful to you by telling you how helpful you are or by telling you that, hey, I couldn't get this transaction done without you. Folks, this is a type of emotional manipulation that's employed in an attempt to get you to lower your guard by playing on a person's natural desire to be liked and to have a stress-free transaction. You are more likely to go the extra mile for a person who makes you feel relaxed, and you're more likely to overlook discrepancies or red flags for people you've got a comfortable relationship with. Risk words. Sometimes fraudsters will use words that fall into the category of risk, which express a possibility of a negative action or an outcome to you personally. Common risk words that you'll see are concern, failure, prevent, or avoid. For example, if you fail to do this, I will have to involve my lawyer and I hope you want to avoid that. Or I'm going to call your supervisor. This is a manipulation tactic which tries to instill fear in you by getting you to think that something bad is going to happen if you don't do what's being asked of you. This may play into a fear of, hey, I might be getting into trouble, or I might cause my company to lose money, or I don't want to get my client to get mad at me. Look, one easy way to combat that fear, just contact your client. Let your client know you suspect there could be fraud at play, and you're going to be carefully analyzing the situation as it unfolds. Another red flag, negative words. So if an email contains instructions of things that you must not, or you shall not, or you never, or do not do, chances are it's a red flag. Consider what it is they're instructing you not to do. And ask yourself in the ordinary course of your day, does that make sense? Are they asking you not to call someone to verify something? Are they telling you that you must not send documents to an email address that you have otherwise been using in the transaction? The mention of God. It's not typical in our U.S. business relationships to mention God in any way. We know that religion is one of those off-limit topics in business in our country, but that's not the case in foreign countries. If someone mentions God in an email, this can be another red flag, and you may be dealing with someone from a country where that's acceptable or even expected in a business transaction. Urgency. As if your job's not hard enough and filled with stress, there's always that transaction where you're told that it's urgent that we close right away. Well, there are real transactions in cases where urgency is real, for example, a 1031 exchange. But the fraudsters are master manipulators into getting you to feel the urgent need to close right away or send that wire. Their emails commonly request you to close because for whatever reason, it's urgent. If you see these demands and pleas for you to act urgently, my advice to you, slow down. Take a deep breath, confirm with all parties in the transaction whether there's a real urgency to close. Availability. It's a red flag when someone states in an email they are not and cannot be available by phone. If you have any doubt or question that you're dealing with a fraudster when you're seeing these types of words in an email or communication, talk about it. Contact your local underwriter.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to pop in quickly and give
Sure.
everyone the course code for today. The course code is kindly. The course code is kindly.
Love it. Okay, so we're going to see examples of all these words in action in a moment, but I want to talk a minute about grammar. Poor grammar. Since most scammers originate from overseas, they may have a poor command of the English language. Not always, but it's a common red flag. There'll be a level of unsophistication in the language that you should not typically expect from someone that you've been dealing with in a transaction. Know that overseas scammers are working on large volumes, and they either don't know their grammar is poor, nor they care because it works either way. Again, even with AI, they still are making the same mistakes with AI. They're still putting these words in their fake emails. The grammar might be better, but the words are still there. Now, don't allow yourself to create in your mind an excuse or a story as to why the grammar in an email is bad. While many people who are not native English speakers struggle with grammar, and that, of course, is 100% understandable, translate apps and grammar check functions can make it flawless. And if this person is only communicating to you through email, bad grammar is a red flag. So besides the specific type of words I pointed out to you, communications from fraudsters will commonly contain bad grammar and usage. What kind? Well, missed punctuation, misuse of punctuation, for example, using a lot of punctuation marks, misspelled words, incorrect spacing or formatting, including using different fonts within the same email, capitalization errors, improper verb and or verb tense usage. Now we're going to take a look at some real examples of emails in fraudulent transactions, and we're going to talk about the various red flags. You're going to see from these examples that rarely do these emails contain just one red flag. And as we go through these, I want you to ask yourself if you would have spotted the fraud if you were the person who had received these emails. Would you have been manipulated by the lexicon, or would you have dismissed the bad grammar? Here's a hint. While you're reviewing emails, it can help to say and read the email out loud. Our brains do a great job of autocorrecting, and sometimes vocalizing can help you see how something could be wrong or broken. This was supposed to be a payoff statement from Wells Fargo. Take a second and read it. There are numerous red flags here, and I've marked them in the next slide. I'll give you 10 seconds. Okay, here they are. Jacqueline's not capitalized. Apologized is misspelled. Inconveniences should be inconvenience and is also misspelled. Account is misspelled, right? Wire.n, no space there. Kindly, there it is. The name Owner 11 LLC has no spaces. Routing at the bottom, misspelled. Bank address, not capitalized. Missing a comma after Santa Ana. Here's example 2. This was a letter from a buyer supposedly received from a title company. Let's look at it for context. Kindly, there it is again. Avoid mistakes. This is a risk word. You don't make that mistake. Don't bother. Negative words. Kindly, again. Please do give. I mean, who talks like that? P.S. This should never be used in a professional email. It's a red flag. Again, these are real examples. It's a red flag when someone states in an email that they're not and cannot be available by phone. Let's take a look at this one. I'm not available for phone calls at the moment due to my job routine as an oil rig engineer. The third line, the offer would be in my name, you Fran Richard. Well, but he signed the thing at the bottom as Richard. There it is. This guy stated he's an engineer. There's the red flag, right? They can't be available. The surname first is custom in various Asian countries. You got to be on the lookout to see if the person is from an area like that. If they say they're from North Carolina, they put their surname first. It's a red flag. Here Here, it's marked up here, right? If they don't have access to something, this time a printer, it's a red flag. All right, we know he's an offshore engineer. So what? Again, this truly came and was received clearly fraudulent. Here's example 4. Still in a process of divorce, but separated for now. I live in a country home here in South Africa. Hans have already contacted me about it on my email. I will print it out, put my signature signed when I receive the email on my document on my email. I will sign again in front of Notary Public and in front of 2 witnesses. There it is, and before God. I'm done talking. I mean, the first sentence doesn't make sense. Someone from South Africa should know that South should be capitalized. That whole paragraph is bad, but it has a lexicon in it. It's the reference of God. The phrase "I'm done talking" is very odd. All right. Keep in mind that pay attention to where people want wires to be sent and where their bank is located. It's a red flag if their funds are being wired to a different state or country than where they are located, especially if you have a foreign, non-US based seller. So we have this cashier's check scam that's going on. It's still going on. And you should be aware of it. So we had a cashier's fraud scheme targeting vacant land in New England. Funds that are to be used to close are presented in an amount above the sales price or the contract price, with a request for excess proceeds to be refunded to a third party, usually a corp or an LLC. The cashier's checks are fraudulent, but they look good. They appear on their face to be authentic, and in one instance, a depositing bank made the funds available to escrow before the check cleared because of the authentic appearance of the check. It's important to recognize this fraud scheme. Okay. Again, I said the web's not focused on wire fraud. That's a whole other thing. But keep in mind, if somebody's saying, "Oh, I know I was supposed to give you a $200,000 deposit. I gave you $250. Send me back the $50." That's a big red flag. Again, this is the scam. It's happening now. And again, these scams like unencumbered vacant land and cashier check scams, they move. They move across the country. They start in California or Texas. They move east to Florida. Then they move up north to New York. These are things you have to be aware of. These scams are working because not all of the fraudsters are being thwarted. Let's talk about authority issues, right? Look at the aspects of your transaction. You have to dig through corporate formation documents, which is painstaking, to prevent fraud. You've got to compare the names of members of entities in original documents versus amended documents. If you have to, ask for corporate tax returns. Be aware of entity hijacking. After you've reviewed those corporate formation documents, check to see if the members or principals of the selling entity are the same as those that were first named in the original formation documents. Ask yourself, who's signing the contract? Who's signing the deed? I'm sure you've all heard of foreclosure rescue or white knight scams. These are fraudulent. It's a ripoff, mostly of unsuspecting people and those who are elderly. So you've got a fraudulent prospective buyer who makes an offer to a homeowner who's at risk of foreclosure. And in these cases, the homeowner signs over a deed for a quote unquote temporary period. And in some cases, the scammer then sells the home, even attempts to evict the former homeowner, or they get mortgages and then they take off with the proceeds. How do you avoid becoming a victim? Well, while it may seem overwhelming to be on the lookout for sinister scam artists at each stage of a homeownership process, consumers can take simple steps to protect themselves. Be aware of the phone numbers or email addresses that are contacting you for personal information. Share that with your agents, with your clients. Look, just one letter or number from a familiar contact that looks off warrants a double check. If you get an offer from someone that you're considering engaging with, go ahead, verify the person or the company. Use Google. Contact Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Again, ask questions. How'd you get my name? Why do you think I'm at the risk of foreclosure? We're going to go through some red flags to watch out for. Unencumbered vacant land. This is a big one. It's popular. It's going on throughout the country. Uninsured warranty deeds or quitclaim deeds or no consideration deeds recorded within the last 12 months and no title insurance policy being issued for that transaction. Release and satisfactions of mortgage and liens recorded within the last 12 months. How about the last 24 months? That's what we go by at First American, where there's been no related sale or refi, right? So you're seeing a SAT being recorded, but there was no sale. You know, the mortgage was $1.1 million, $1.2 million. It was taken out 6 years ago. Not likely it's been amortized. You got to start to ask questions. Visibly altered documents. Signatures. Does the signature on a previously recorded mortgage match the signature on a deed being offered for recording? Notary and witness. Does that notary stamp look off? The date of execution and acknowledgement. Questionable ownership. The seller's name in the contract doesn't match the name on the last deed of record or legal description is wrong. These are red flags. Electronically executed documents. Powers of attorney, especially for the elderly. Here's a new scam. Powers of attorney for New York powers of attorney executed with Ron Notary. New York does not authorize the execution of a power of attorney in New York with Ron Notary. By the way, that's in the statute. Request for disbursement of seller proceeds to go to a third party. Usually a red flag. Improper ID for principals in the transaction. Documents executed outside the presence of a notary or an unknown notary. You can look up notaries in New York. You could see, who is this person really a notary? Documents executed outside of the physical location of the transaction's principals. Unexplained or unreasonable closing deadlines. Not always a red flag. Sense of urgency, the lexicon, unoccupied vacation or rental properties. Please don't use drop boxes to send out mortgage payoffs. They are getting broken into. The checks are being washed. Payoffs aren't being made. Suspect every transaction where people who are supposedly involved in a deal don't appear in your office in person, or you can't speak to them or confirm who you're talking to. You can establish a team among your employees that can be trained to identify valid state-issued IDs and who aren't afraid to ask questions when there are discrepancies. And when you come across any inconsistency, ask for an explanation. They owe it to you. Do not use public Wi-Fi when you're working on a tablet, phone, or computer. I think that's also an ethics issue for attorneys. Know and control your deal. And in conclusion, again, there are various ways and tools for all of us to use to combat fraud. Don't hesitate to avail yourself of the tools. Google's a tool that we have at our disposal. You can Google what an ID from a particular state or country looks like. Just remember my malware incident, what you're going to click on. There's Google reverse image. If you're dealing with property in New York City or other counties where you have access to public records, you can look up a person's name. And if there are documents of record, compare their signature on those docs versus a proposed signature being given to you now. If you uncover a fraud scheme, share it, because fraudulent trends spread across the country. We're in this together. You're the first line of defense. I've got a little good news and bad news. The bad news was last year, because of fraud, my company, First American, suffered $21 million in losses. Here's the good news. We saved over $100 million in finding fraudulent transactions. And we'll share that information with our other underwriters as well, because we are all in this together. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I know we're probably a minute or two over. Keep your minds, your eyes open for red flags. And again, heightened security is the best way to combat fraud. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you go like 2 or 3 more minutes for just a couple of questions?
Sure.
Everyone, if you need to log off, the formal presentation is over, but I'm just going to ask a couple of questions that were asked, more than once, and then I'll shoot you an email with more specific ones. A lot of people were asking about emails. Do you have to open the attachment or the link in order for somebody to infiltrate your computer? Can just opening it do that?
A year ago, I'd say you probably had to click on a link. Now I think you could open it, but once you open it, you've got to hover your mouse. Again, the best thing is just don't click on any attachments. You can open the email, but the way that they get you to download everything is by getting you to click on links. Again, the fraudsters are getting very good now. They're able to embed malware into Word documents. Again, as each day passes, they're getting better and better. So yeah, you could open the email, but obviously you're not expecting it. Why bother?
They want to know, do these fraudsters ever get caught, or is there who's out there looking for them?
They do get caught. The FBI is involved, the state attorney generals. You can see, unfortunately, lawyers that are being disbarred because they're have a hand in some of these fraudulent transactions. Yeah, people are getting caught.
In general, how long do you find that the banks are taking to find a check that's fraudulent?
I don't have any specific info on that. I do know that we've had several saves in our $100 million worth of saves with banks taking a step back and looking. I can't answer that directly. I mean, each bank is different.
And can you repeat the name of the company or who you verify an ID with? Is there a way to verify IDs?
Yes. Give me a second.
Thank you.
You mean the companies that you can hire to do that?
Yes.
Yes. Give me 1 second. Wow. One of them, I think. Oh my goodness. There's OCR Labs. There's Socure, SOCURE, and HID, HID Global, GLOBAL.
And I put that in the chat quickly. Is there a way to check if somebody's is there a notary public website to check
Yeah,
out?
it's with the Department of State. All you have to do is Google that, get onto the New York Department of State website, and you can see a list of all the people that are authorized to be notaries in New York.
Sounds good. So in an interest of staying somewhat on time, we will end it now. I have some of the questions. If you have a question that was not answered or you have any additional questions, just shoot me an email and I will forward them over to Vincent. Thank you so much for a great lecture. We appreciate your time and we will see you guys next month.
Thank you.